Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahi Tejasvina Vadhidamastu Ma Vidvishavahi. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. We are continuing the discussion on this mantra which comes at the beginning of Brahmananda Valli, that is the Prathama Anuvaka, means, yeah. So the mantra continues. So the original mantra is Om Brahmavida Apnoti Param Tadesha Bhyukta Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. This is the mantra. So Satyam Jnanam Anantam.
I'll be interrupt you for just a second. What age?
Oh yeah, I don't. Yesterday you can second chapter, first lesson,
Okay.
second chapter, first lesson. Yesterday, the same thing. Maybe page 90. I don't have that. Yeah, most probably. Yeah,
That's good.
yeah. I don't have that text with me. So we are continuing the discussion. Our true nature is defined from the standpoint of the absolute reality as existence or truth absolute, consciousness or intelligence absolute, and infinitude. This is the definition. So I mentioned yesterday there are two types of defining, or rather two approaches to the definition of the absolute reality. One, the direct approach, the other, the indirect approach. The direct definition is from the standpoint of the reality of the absolute reality itself. From the Brahman perspective, there's a direct definition which explains the essential nature of the absolute reality. The essential nature is called in Sanskrit Swarupa, Sosya Rupa, one's own true nature. That is, there is one absolute, undivided reality, transcendental reality behind this manifold universe, behind this diversity and plurality. Beyond and behind, there is one absolute reality, one unified reality. Now, this is the definition or explanation from itself. So you can define one reality from its perspective and also from our perspective. So, see, if you suppose you want to explain to a student an important principle in any science, any branch of learning for the matter, you can explain it from the standpoint of what you are going to explain, which may be properly understood only by an advanced student. But for a beginner, he needs to approach the subject from the perspective of what he already knows, and you have to connect his mind from what he knows to something that he is going to know. So connecting the known to the unknown. The latter approach is called indirect approach. In Sanskrit we call Tatastha Lakshana. So that's what we discussed 2-3 days back. That is the one reality from which everything emerges. The one reality which sustains everything. The one reality which is eventually the point of termination, dissolution. Now, this was the approach that Varuna, the teacher and the father of Bhrigu, adopted while teaching him. Yatova imani bhudani jayante yena jatani jivanti yet prayandhavisam visanti. We found in the early Bhrigu, a small little boy went to his father and requested him, please teach me the highest truth. So father told him, See, look around the trees, mountains and valleys, oceans, all these. Where do they come from? And is there something that sustains them from behind? And do you know what is going to happen to them? So, what is that? Well, put in the macro language, let's say, from where does the universe emerge? What was there before Big Bang? And what is that which sustains this universe as it is now? And eventually what could happen when it ceases to exist the way it is existing? So this question can be put in the context of anything from the material world and also in the context of the entire creation and universe. This is called the Tadastha Lakshana, the indirect method. Then there is another method, that is directly you tell somebody what it is. Now both these explanations and descriptions are only approximations. They are not descriptions. Actually, description of something and that something itself are two different entities. You may write a book on this glass, a huge volume, but this glass itself is different. So every explanation is only an approximation. It is not equal to what you are explaining. This is true of anything in this world, and it is much more true of, the context of Brahman. So, satyam, jnanam, anantam. These are three terms used as an attempt to approximately define what is actually beyond definition. So what is that? It is very easy for us to define the absolute reality in terms of a monotheistic, anthropomorphic creator God. But there you are giving your own idea, you are imposing your own idea on God, really speaking. So every culture, every civilization has evolved its own idea of the absolute reality, God. And as we evolve in spiritual life, our own definition, our own understanding, our own interpretation of the absolute reality also evolves. As we evolve to a higher universal perspective, then we cannot think of a God who sits on a fine morning and creates this world. It's a very arbitrary. It is not wrong. The great glory of Vedanta is, it doesn't say this is wrong. Vedanta says this is the primary school level. That's all. Primary school level is not wrong, because you go to a university and write a thesis only based on what you learned in many classes, including the primary school. You cannot disown what you learn in the kindergarten when you reach the university. The same alphabet you use. So Vedanta says these anthropomorphic or monotheistic interpretations, including innumerable monotheistic godheads in Hindu tradition, Vedanta says it is not wrong, only it's only reaching an evolving stage towards a higher perspective of our understanding of the absolute reality. So, satyam, jnanam, anantam. Satyam is the truth, existence. Jnanam is knowledge or intelligence. Anantam means the infinitude. What is infinite? Now, these terms are very elaborately explained in the critical expositions. First, existence. Now, if you talk about satyam or existence, you have to talk about the cause, what we call the original cause, the final cause of the world. The earth from which you make a pot. The pot is the effect, and what we call in science karya, and earth is karana, the cause. Now, is this absolute reality Brahman a material cause, as the earth is the material cause of the pot from because you make the pot from the earth. So in order to deny that kind of wrong interpretation, the Upanishad tell you, no, it is consciousness. It is intelligent. Earth is not conscious. It is not intelligent. So it is not a raw material from which everything comes. So in order to avoid that misunderstanding, the second adjective is used. It is consciousness. Now, if you are talking about consciousness or knowledge, sometimes we call, you become conscious of something. You know about this earth, the sky, the mountains, the valleys, the lake. You come to know of that. It's knowledge or awareness or consciousness. So it becomes located. Well, I know the sky. I know what the sky is. I know the lake. I know the mountain. So our knowledge or awareness, our intelligence in relation to the known object, it's a limitation of the whole idea of awareness. In order to avoid that misunderstanding, the Vedanta uses the third adjective. It is infinite. So the existence, which is not really just a cause of something, which is consciousness or conscious, and it is not consciousness or awareness related to one object, so it is infinite. Now, here, Vedanta, in the commentaries, the great teachers are very eager to point out one unique aspect of this particular section of Vedanta. You know, in the Christian theological tradition, Master Eckhart has made a unique contribution called via negativa, the negative theology. So, if you cannot define something in terms of some adjectives or adverbs, then you remove all possible adjectives, and what is left out is beyond the adjective. So Eckhart says you cannot say, and the Holy Trinity itself is an inadequate, imperfect, incomplete understanding of the Godhead. So that is via negativa. So in the Upanishad, in the Mandukya Upanishad, this is called the Vidhi Nishedha Vakya, means the negative approach, because you cannot define something as what it is. You can only say what it is not. What it is, where it is beyond description and explanation. So, na anta prakyam, na bahish prakyam, na ubhayada prakyam, na prakyam, na prakyam. So, I am not going to those details. It comes the Mundaka Upanishad. It is not awareness in the context of being aware of external things projected outward. It is not awareness projected inward, and it is not the blending of both. Like that, all possible verbalizations are denied. That is in the Mandukya Upanishad. Now, if you read whatever we have got, let's see, for me, my access only English translation of Eckhart works, Rudolf Otto. So, if you read Rudolf Otto and Eckhart, it sounds almost like, modern English translations of Shankaracharya's sentences in the Bhashya. Shankara lived in the 8th century AD and Eckhart in the 13th century in Germany. So all that we have is our access to the English translation interpretation by Rudolf Otto, who actually gave a new life to Eckhartian theology because he was buried and forgotten for centuries. Anyway, that's a different matter. So the point is, the absolute reality cannot be explained, cannot be described. So every attempt to explain is only a failed attempt to explain what is really beyond explanation, is only an approximation. So this is one unique aspect of Vedanta brought out in this context. It is called Panja Shabda Pravritti Nishedha, means the denial of the 5 conditions of verbalization. So how do we explain something with words? So jadi, guna, karma, dravya, sambandha, these are the 5 conditions in Sanskrit. So let's say jadi. Suppose you want to explain an animal you saw in the zoo, then you may, it belongs to that species or this species or something. You may explain a living creature in terms of the species to which it belongs, it's jati. Guna means, suppose you want to explain a flower, it is red flower, green flower, white flower, yellow flower. Some of the attributes of that object you may use to explain a flower. Or if you want to describe a person, you may say he's a musician, he's an actor, he's a writer, or he's my uncle or somebody like that. So some kind of relationship or work he does. If he's a musician, what he does is singing or composing music. So you explain that person in terms of what he does. And also if a person is to be explained in the context of your relationship to that person, he is my uncle. And if none of these conditions apply, well, you may say it's like sun or moon or the stars. Nobody asks the question, what is sun? So obvious. So pratyaksha siddha means it is obvious. So these are 5 types of explanations that we can ever think of in the world of philosophy. So Vedanta says this Brahman cannot be explained, and it is our true nature, it is our true reality. And that's not the knowledge or awareness that comes from outside. It is our own true nature. So at that level there is no distinction or difference between the seer or the seen, the perceiver, the perceived, the drashta and the drishya, or the dhyata, dhyeya, the meditator, or what he meditates upon. Now the question arises, of what use is this for us in our life? This is a simple question. Anyone can ask this question, should ask the question. In what way is this going to be beneficial to us? So in fact Shankaracharya's Bhashya contains an indirect reference to this. So somebody is asking this question. In the context of answering that question, Shankaracharya brings out the practical benefit indirectly. So the question is, of course, in Sanskrit, Nanu sarvagatam sarvasya cha atmabhudam brahma vakshyati ado na apyam aptischa anyasya anyena parichinnasya cha parichinnena drashta aparichinnam sarvatmakam cha brahma ityadaha parichinnavat anatmavaccha tasya aptihi anubapanna. Now, based on our own understanding, what we discussed so far, a philosopher who is not willing to accept non-dualism or Vedanta or Taittiriya Upanishad teachings, he is putting forward an objection, an opposite view. He says, the literal meaning of this particular mantra we are discussing is Brahmavid apnoti param. Brahmavid means the one who knows Brahman, the one who realizes his identity with this transcendental spiritual reality, Brahman. I am not this physical body, mind or intellect, I am that Atman. This person, who he attains or obtains Brahman. This is the literal meaning of this particular statement in the Upanishad, Brahmavid apnoti param. Now this objector has a serious question to ask. What's the question? You say that this Brahman is your true nature, and it is not something to be known, it is not coming from outside, it is our true nature. We discussed this yesterday. This knowledge is not manufactured as we manufacture a pot. It is not something that you reach leaving behind one place. It is not something that you somehow create by adding something to it or taking something away from it. It is not made through some kind of refining process. So it is not apya, samskarya, vikarya, outpadya. Like that, these are the Sanskrit explanation equivalents. But now you say this Upanishad tells you an order of Brahman attains Brahman. So don't you think it is something to be attained? So your argument that Brahman is our true nature, it falls to the ground. This is the argument put forward by another philosopher who is not willing to accept this philosophy. So Shankaracharya gives an answer to this. He says, Na ayam doshaga katham darsana adarsana apekshatvat brahmanaga apti anaptiyoho paramatthado brahmaswarupasya api sataha asya jivasya bhudamatraguda bahya parichinnan annamayadi atmadarshinaha tadasakta chetasaka prakrita sankhya puranasya atmanaha avyavahitasya api bahya sankhya vishaya asakta chittadaya Surubhabhavadarshanavat Paramartha Brahma Surubhabhavadarshana Lakshanaya Avidyaya Annamayadin Bahyan Anatmanaha Atmatvena Pratipannatvat Annamayadi Anatmabhyu Na Anyohamasmi Iti Abhimanyate. So Annamayadi Anatmabhyu Na Anyohamasmi Iti Abhimanyate Evam Avidyaya Atmabhudamapi Brahma Anaptam Siyat. Well, it's an ancient language, but when I explain English, you understand how logical it is. The point is this. So he gives an example. Well, Brahman is our own true reality. He is our true nature. And this knowledge is not a gift from an angel or somebody. Atman is our true nature. It is not an awareness created or manufactured. It is like home, coming back to our own home. So when we reach the stage of spiritual enlightenment, you are actually coming back to our own home. You don't have to pay money for it. It is your place. In fact, we wrongly thought we are away from our home. And now when we are back in our home, we think it is something new. It is wrong. So he gives an example, Shankaracharya gives an example. In the context of ordinary things, we frequently use the word, I am going from one place to another place in the context of traveling. Or if I am making a pot or something, then I may use terms like manufacturing, refining, processing, etc. But in the context of our spiritual identity, Atman, these terms are totally immaterial. Why? So he gives an example. Suppose somebody is counting 10 people assembled in a room, total 10, including the person who takes count of the number. So that's why Prakrita Sankhya Puranasya Atmanaha Avyavhitasya Api Bhakya Sankhya Vishayasakta Chittadaya Surubhava Abhava Darshanava. That means a person who is counting, but he doesn't count himself. So he said there are only 10 people. Where is the 10th one? Sorry, there are only 9 people. Where is the 10th person? He was told that there are 10 people in the room assembled in the hall. And this man is counting. And these 10 people are including himself, the one who takes count of the total number. But he forgets to count himself. So he gets only 9 people. And he goes in search of everywhere, the 10th man. So somebody has to come and tell him, look here, the 10th one is yourself. So because he is so much obsessed with the act of counting, he may forget the fact that the total number of 10 includes he himself. So he may forget to count himself. Then somebody has to come and tell him, look here, the 10th one is yourself. Similarly, just as he forgets to take count of himself, counting all the 9 people assembled, we very often identify ourselves. I am this body, I am this mind, I am the person who will catch cold, become healthy, unhealthy, mentally, at the mental level, I am happy and unhappy. I lost my money, I am thirsty, I have lost my friend. So in this way, he gets obsessed, he gets worried, he loses his true identity because he identifies himself with what he actually is not. That is, he identifies himself with his body. So when we define ourselves, when we understand ourselves to be our body, the slightest bodily problem can be a disaster. When we identify ourselves with the mind, the slightest pain or unhappiness can be a disaster. When we identify ourselves with the intellect, then when we read a book, it is not interesting enough, then we are disappointed. So all these experiences happen so long as we do not identify ourselves with what we actually are. So we forget our spiritual dimension, spiritual identity, just as the person who takes count of the people assembled in the room forgets to count himself. He counts only the other 9 people. He excludes himself. Like that, in this world when we live, when our mind is dictated by these sense objects, by pain and pleasure, good and bad, we actually forget our true identity. This forgetfulness happens thanks to one unique phenomenon, which is again cannot be literally explained, because when we come out of it, we understand it doesn't exist. It is called Maya. So we can ask the simple question: why is it that this great spiritual truth, that we are not just these physical bodies, is frequently forgotten? We forget the great spiritual truth that we are not just this mind which is happy now and unhappy later. We forget this great truth. We may read again and again, we may understand again and again, and we have full conviction that this great spiritual truth is the reality, but we forget it. That's because one problem is what we actually know to be true at the intellectual level doesn't help us in our real life. Because there is a great conflict and contradiction between where we live at the intellectual level and where we live at the mental level. 99% of our life is lived at the mental level, at the level of emotions, attitudes, feelings, and mental reflexes actually. We don't live at the intellectual level. If we can readily practice what we know, then there will be no problem in the world, actually. The point is, we are not able to practice what we know to be the truth, what we know to be true. So that problem is solved in Vedanta through this mechanism called sadhana sadhushtaya and the 3 other disciplines that I briefly referred to yesterday. So that is why in Shankaracharya's own language he says, Prakrita Sankhya Puranasya Atmanaha Avyavigitasya Api Bahya Sankhya Vishayasakta Chittataya Surupa Abhava Darshanavad. We don't see our own true nature, Surupa. Why? Because we identify ourselves to be what we actually are not. So this Maya, which is actually responsible for our inability to keep in mind our true nature, the reality. This Maya has got 2 levels of operation. One, it conceals it hides the truth, and when the truth is hidden, the false is projected. So, Maya is not an entity. Maya can be explained as a state of our absence of awareness, and we realize its true nature when we are out of it. When we are within it, that's only reality. So, it operates as two levels. First, it conceals the real. Second, when the reality is concealed, then the false is projected. It happens simultaneously. Because the false is projected, the real is concealed, and because the real is concealed, in its place something else is projected. So long as we are not aware of this truth, the spiritual identity, that's really our true nature, the false identities are always projected. So we identify ourselves with this body. So when the body is sick, everything is lost. So when mind is sick or mind is unhappy, everything is lost. When intellect is bored, then also we feel a great problem within. That's all because the reality that we are the Atman is forgotten or concealed, and the false idea that we are these bodies, we are this mind, we are this intellect, this is projected. It is called avarana and viksheba. Avarana means concealment, concealing, hiding. Viksheba means projecting the false in place of the real. So, this is how this Maya operates. So, Vedanta recommends 7 disciplines to slowly come out of this concealment and this false projection. I already discussed yesterday sadhana chatushtaya and sarvana manana nidithyasana. We already discussed. First, we must have a sense of the real and unreal discerning wisdom. We have God in our life. A child may think a toy or a candy is the most precious thing in the world. A young man may consider these things as irrelevant or may not very significant. An aged man may consider something else much more important, much more significant that really matters in life. So in our biological life and mental life, intellectual life, we go through these various levels of nitya anitya vastu viveka, means the discerning wisdom, that is discerning the real from the unreal. But in spiritual life, to begin with, as a conviction, we must try to develop this idea within. I mean, this world is there, we have to live in the world, we have to work in the world, we need all these necessary things. Artha and Kama are accepted and approved in Vedantic scheme, but should be based on the principle of dharma, with an eye on moksha. Then the path will be straight and smooth. So, this is the first. Second step I mentioned yesterday is we must disregard the unreal and we should emphasize the real, that is iha amutra phala bhoga viraga. I mean renunciation of the unreal, renunciation of the empirical. It doesn't mean throwing away, giving up or anything. Rather, in our mind, we should set a new set of priorities. Even while doing work, even while struggling hard to achieve great result in business or in industry, wherever it is, we should somehow keep in our mind, well, this success, this great wealth which I may generate is not going to last long. And it won't be the answer to all my problems. The richest man is not the happiest. The most successful man also is not the happiest. So, something that makes you unhappy may make you successful in achieving empirical things. But if that makes you unhappy, it is not a big success in the true sense of the term. So, in order to really succeed, we must know the limitation of success. In order to enjoy success, we should know where success stops or what we need beyond success. Then you will really succeed. That's why people who reach this level of transcendental wisdom in Indian Vedantic tradition called Rajarshi. Rajarshi is a person who, well, in modern times I could say, if you can combine the heart of a Buddha and the enterprise of a Henry Ford in modern times, there cannot be a better combination. So Henry Ford alone won't do, and Buddha alone cannot be an answer to the common man living in the street. He has to work hard, earn bread. So a combination of Buddha and Henry Ford. So Buddha can represent, let us say, the Rishitvam. Rishitvam means Rishitvam tasyaha sukshmartha darsana kshamatvam. The wisdom of a sage who recognizes and realizes the limitation of material success, wealth, and Rajatvam, the status, the symbol of a king is success in material life. So Rajatvam Aishwarya Sambati Rishitvam Tasyaha Sukshmartha Darsana Kshamatvam. A king in terms of activity, but a sage in the contemplative mode. So the combination of the secular and spiritual. So this kind of reprioritization is what we actually mean by sadhana chatushtaya. That is for the beginner. It doesn't mean that should be the ideal throughout. But we begin by reprioritizing our goals, our means and methods. When that happens, we could work hard for success, but we should be aware as to where the success ends, where it stops, where it will be experienced as inadequate. The third discipline is Samadhi Sharka Sambati. Shamadama Uparadi Diksha Shraddha Samadhan. Together, mental restraint, restraining the senses, restraining the mind, the desires, focusing on on one spiritual goal and identifying with it, and withdrawing our mind from undesirable temptations of the senses. This is the third. The fourth discipline I mentioned, mumukshutva, means a strong urge for spiritual illumination, spiritual attainment. Even if we can have our mind fixed on some higher spiritual goal, that itself will have a soothing effect in our struggles in empirical life. When our mind is fixed on the worldly things, then and when we are engaged in worldly pursuits, there will be no peace of mind. When people are engaged in worldly pursuits for success and for attaining the best in the world, at the same time keeping in our mind the fact that there is a higher goal to be attained. So that itself will enable us to look upon and to handle the problems of life in this world in a more intelligent manner, with greater wisdom. These are the four disciplines. That is, in Sanskrit, it is called Nitya Nitya Vastu Viveka, Ihamutra Phala Bhoga Viraga, Samadhi, Sharka Sambati, Mumukshutva. Three additional disciplines in actual practice. One is feeding our mind with great ideas, spiritually healthy ideas. That is one. Then focusing, concentrating on these great teachings that we read in books. Actually, when you read Buddha's teachings, we are connecting with Buddha, who passed away 2,500 years back. So mentally we can establish a connection. So it is called Sravana, Manana, contemplation, and meditate, and Nididhyasana, internalization. So through these disciplines, it is possible for a spiritual seeker to slowly evolve to higher and higher levels of spiritual consciousness. I can give as an example one interesting parable that is from Chandogya Upanishad. So the story is this, it comes in the Chandogya Upanishad. It is called, it's a conversation between Satyakama and Gautama. So there was a great sage mentioned in the Vedic literature. When he was a small boy, he approached his teacher. The teacher's name was Haritudha Gautama. The disciple's name was Satyakama. So he went to the teacher, and the teacher asked him what he wanted, and the student told him, I want to learn the Vedas, I want to learn about the knowledge of Brahman, realization of my spiritual identity. That's what he said. In fact, he tested the teacher, test the student. That's an interesting part of the story, which is not part of the central philosophy. This little boy went to the teacher, and when the teacher asked him about his lineage, normally in ancient times, you will be taught that branch of the Vedas, which is your family, part of your family tradition, and then you may learn all other branches. So, what is your heritage? What lineage? What is your Vedic lineage? So the student could not remember his background. Rather, his background was a bit disturbing. So he said that, and then the Guru told him, Naidat abrahmano vivaktumarhasi. So only a true seeker of Brahman can openly reveal an unpleasant background of his own family. So the teacher was highly impressed, and that's why he got the name Satyakama, the one who loves or who is desirous of what is true. That's the name he got. So this Satyakama went to the teacher. The teacher did not teach a book to him. The teaching was very interesting. So he gave him 400 cows. And these cows were all very old. Some of them are very old, and some of them have become very emaciated, couldn't eat much grass or give any much milk. Anyway, it was not in a very, they were not in good shape. And the teacher told him, you return when the total number reaches 1000. And that was the training he began with. So the student went to the forests and started rearing these 400 cows, looking after them very well, giving them water, bathing them. And in fact, the point is, what he did with great concentration, with great, what we normally call Shraddha, a sense of sanctity and sacredness and intensity and total application, honesty. All these together can roughly be called Shraddha. So Satyakama took upon himself the job of rearing these 400 cows. That is only, he didn't read any book or anything. But when he did that, something happened to his mind. So that is the real message of the story. As he did his job, he will get up in the morning, look after the cows, and then of course he performed his daily rituals. What you call Agnihotra, some of these fundamental disciplines that he was supposed to practice, which his teacher taught him, that he did with great concentration. Then rest of the day he will spend looking at these 400 cows. After a long time, maybe several years, the total number is 1000. When the total number is 1000, something began happening in his mind. So what happened to him was an ascent in his own spiritual evolution. So we mentioned yesterday, Rutam cha swadhyaya pravachane satyam cha swadhyaya pravachane dharmam cha swadhyaya pravachane, we studied yesterday. So when we lead our life, when we do our duty, when we interact with the rest of the world in such a way as not to violate the principles of dharma, the principles of the inherent equilibrium, harmony and peace of the whole universe. So when we regulate our life, then we begin to move in our own spiritual life. We begin to evolve. So our mind accumulates new samskaras. See, whatever we do with a great sense of sanctity and sacredness, with full application, whether teaching, the job of an engineer, a doctor, a medical man or a mechanic, whatever it may be. When we put our whole mind in that, the immediate effect is what we call perfectionism. It is not perfectionism as you study in Kantian concept of, critique of practical reason, or what we call perfectionism as understood in modern engineering or in modern industrial or economic or commercial cultures. No, it is not that kind of perfectionism. That is part of this. But perfectionism also implies application the principles of sanctity and sacredness to what we do. When we attach a sense of sanctity and sacredness to what we do, even including bringing up children, prajanasya swadhyaya pravachanecha prajadisya swadhyaya pravachane, we studied yesterday. And before that we study, satyam vada dharmam chara, then madhurdevo bhava, piturdevo bhava, acharya devo bhava, aditi devo bhava. How to live the life of an ideal son and daughter, father and mother, grandfather and grandmother, brothers and sisters, and how to honor the guest, the teacher, and how to be an ideal citizen of the society, of the country. So when we regulate our life in a way that it is conducive to the harmony and equilibrium of the whole cosmic system of life, which is called rhythm, we mentioned yesterday, we explained, rhythm, then what happens? We also start moving in spiritual life. Mechanical perfection is not enough. A person can reach the highest degree of mechanical, technical perfection. BMW or Mercedes-Benz, anything, this is perfectly okay. But that may not have an effect on our real life. Even Hitler made use of the engineering perfectionism of German culture. Before the Second World War, Siemens was employed in manufacturing. The machines were used in Holocaust concentration camps. So perfectionism, I'm giving an extreme example to drive home the idea that perfectionism at the mechanical level, the technical level, is not what is implied here. Because that kind of perfectionism can leave our mind spiritually impoverished, and we still can remain as monsters even after reaching this kind of perfectionism. It is needed, no doubt. It is certainly needed and required for eradicating poverty, for the improvement of economy, wonderful. But that perfectionism is only a small, maybe not insignificant, but very small fraction of this perfectionism. So what this man did, this boy rather, Satyakama, every day he got up and he did his own spiritual practices, ablutions, etc. And then he took upon himself this duty and responsibility of looking after these 400 emaciated cows with great care and attention, and in a few years he reached 1,000. So by the time his mind had completely altered, because the mind underwent a complete refining process. The mind accumulated samskaras. Good actions will produce good vrittis, and good vrittis become samskaras, vasanas, and the whole mind undergoes a complete transformation, a kind of refinement. So what happens? Then he felt a bull appeared in front of him. Bull was one of these animals. And he felt this bull is imparting a great spiritual wisdom to him. And after some time, a fire, because he has to light a fire in the morning for his Agnihotra. So he felt when he did that, in his mind, he felt a great spiritual truth was projected. So also when he was looking after these animals, maybe including a bull, he must have suddenly, but it could happen. Every day if you do a work, your daily duty with a great sense of sanctity and sacredness. Maybe one day when you are washing your teeth or maybe cleaning the floor, suddenly a great idea can come to you. It is not that cleaning the floor teaches you, no. Mind was being churned, mind was going through this internal refining process. So in the process of performing our mechanical duties and responsibilities, maybe in this case, this man was perhaps giving fodder to the bull. At that time, a great spiritual truth occurred in his mind. So that is put in the language of metaphor, in the parable. The bull taught him. What it means is, when he was looking after his work, including looking after the bull, suddenly a great idea, a great spiritual truth flashed in his mind, because his mind was already traveling, going through this spiritual journey. When he was doing all his duty with a great sense of sacredness and sanctity. So it is not perfectionism, it's not mechanical perfectionism, not work ethic, but rather it was along with work ethic and mechanical perfectionism, because he must have been feeding the cows very well. That's why they became 1,000. So obvious. But with this sense of sanctity and sacredness, his mind accumulated spiritual samskaras and tendencies. So when he was doing that, he felt the bull talk to him, taught him something great, some spiritual truth. So also fire, when he was kindling the fire for this Agnihotra. And then a swan. So maybe a swan must have appeared in the field. So he felt, when he looked at the swan, he had a great spiritual truth. That is the result of his own spiritual sadhana, spiritual tapa, as we mentioned yesterday. He was traveling in his inner spiritual life. So he felt the swan taught him a great spiritual truth. And then another bird is called Madgu. This is the story goes. So the whole nature becomes an educator when we look upon ourselves as a spiritual entity, and when we employ our mind and our senses of senses of perception and senses of action. So when we employ our own jnanendriyas and karmendriyas, the senses of perception and senses of action, and mind and thoughts and tendencies, when they are given a spiritual orientation, a spiritual direction, whole life becomes a spiritual journey. Every thought becomes a meditation, every word becomes sacred, every movement becomes an act of worship. And the whole nature becomes an open book from where we can learn. So this is what happened to Satyakama. And when this happens, what really happens is suddenly a sense of sanctity and sacredness. Not inside a place of worship, but rather in our daily activities we feel, and this is how a person evolves in spiritual life. So we'll continue the discussion tomorrow. We have interaction. Most welcome to ask any questions, any questions. We have half an hour. If we don't have questions, I shall continue the lesson. That's a must.
Maharaj, how is tapa and Shraddha related? You talked about tapa.
Yeah, they're, in actual practice they are the same. Because person, any individual who is performing if all his activities as tapa, he will have a sense of sanctity. And a person who has a sense of sanctity in his whole life, his whole life becomes a tapa.
So Shraddha has to come before tapa, or
They're the same. In actual experience, they are the same. You find people, even in villages, they are not necessarily conventional believers in God or religion. You find that something very interesting. Those who look upon their duty with with seriousness, and also they practice unselfishness and look upon whatever they are doing as something sacred. When we attach this sanctity element to what we do, then the whole activity and duty becomes different. Then, of course, every concentrated activity will produce its own result. That is, cause and effect law is there. But along with that, something happens to the mind. The internal spiritual journey begins. That's because of the application of Shraddha and Tapa. And also when we read books, for example, with a sense of sanctity, those words can have more meaning than when we read the same book mechanically. So as I mentioned, whole life becomes a process of a kind of spiritual practice. Just like the whole nature becomes a teacher. That's what happened to Satyakama. He was living in the forests, not in the hermitage. And he didn't undergo daily lessons. Later, after he returned home, Gautama taught him. But what Gautama taught him was what he had already learned from the bull, from that bird, from the swan, and from the fire. That's how the Upanishad says. Because that's not enough. Then his teacher gave him, when he returned, when he got back to the hermitage after maybe several years, his teacher exclaimed, "You look like a man of spiritual attainment. What happened to you?" So Satyakama narrated his whole story. How he got up in the morning, how he did his duties, how he looked after these 400 cows, and then how one day one bull came to him, swan came to him, fire came to him. Very often Upanishads use metaphors, figures of speech, and maybe parables. So when Satyakama narrated the whole story, then Gautama told him, what they taught is true, now listen to me. Then he gave him formal scriptural education, which only confirmed what he had already learned, because he had already reached his spiritual goal in his own way through his internal spiritual journey. You find many people who do their duty without any selfish motive, with a great sense of sanctity, seriousness. They are not ordinary people. Their internal life is different. The internal life, the mind works differently. They may not read scriptures, may not expound scriptures, but when we explain to them many of these great truths, they may not openly tell us, but very often it is something that they already go through. Not really. Yeah.
Swami, you said early on, how is this knowledge useful to us? You asked that question, or it was, and I was just wondering, does the story show that the yogi or that holy path of the sannyasin is the same then as the householder? I mean, he's taking care of those 400 cows.
Yeah.
So are they sort of the same?
Yeah.
Ultimately?
I shall give the another picture. What I wanted to say was how a person evolves in his or her life and reach this level of what we described yesterday, ananta. Tomorrow we will take up the subject. Total freedom from fear. That's your abhayam pradishtam vindate. Okay, now there is an interesting dialogue in the Mahabharata. It is in Sanskrit called Pativrata Brahmachari Samvadaha. A debate or a discussion or dialogue between a chaste wife, a chaste mother, and an ascetic. This is literal meaning. I mean, let us say a housewife, an ordinary housewife, not a well-educated scholar or anybody, an ordinary housewife, and an ascetic. There is a dialogue. Now, the story goes like this. Swamiji refers to that in one of his maybe Karma Yoga lectures and elsewhere. So, there was a young man who lived in a forest. He was sitting under a tree for many years, meditating. He had left his home, maybe traveled long distance, reached the forest, and he sat under the tree and meditated for many years. And he felt himself that he had quite advanced a lot. And one day he heard a disturbing noise on the branches of the tree, and he found two birds were fighting and making a lot of noise. The twigs were falling on him, so he stared at them and angrily. And so those birds were burned to ashes. So he felt very satisfied. Now I have got some miraculous power. This is wonderful. He congratulated himself.
Yes.
And then he left that place, traveled far and wide, several miles, and reached a home. So when he reached a home, I have to explain this background, give this background. In ancient India, and now also you find in many parts of, especially northwestern India, this practice. When monks travel, they normally use a word, bhavati bhiksham dehi, please give me alms. So in medieval Europe, the Franciscan phrase used alms for Saint Francis, in the name of Saint Francis, something like they use. So this was common practice, much more common of a common practice in medieval Russia, because you find in Russian Orthodox tradition the women were very humble and very devoted and very pious, and used to give alms to these wandering pilgrims. So you find this in The Way of a Pilgrim, that book. So how the pilgrim was welcomed a stranger's home, and how the children and the housewife gathered around him and asked him to pray for them and asking questions, and how they treated with great hospitality for 3 days, and he continued his journey like that. So in this context, this ascetic reached home and shouted, please give me alms. So then from inside, maybe in the kitchen, a lady answered, sir, please wait for a minute or something. And now this ascetic got angry. How dare she ask me to wait? So you can imagine the inadequacy of just the mechanical practices. That's what I mentioned earlier in the last class. If this man had really done his spiritual practices with a sense of humility and sanctity and sacredness, he would also learn to be humble. But that he has not learned. But he was a spiritual seeker. So this lady asked him, please wait. When this thought flashed in his mind, how dare this lady ask me to wait? When the thought, he didn't speak, when the thought flashed in his mind, the lady answered, sir, don't get angry. There are no birds here for you to burn to ashes by staring. Now this had happened several miles away. And but this man was a sincere person. He had not fully reached his goal, but he was sincere. That's the difference between a spiritual seeker and others. Spiritual seeker will be able to flash the torchlight into his own mind and will be able to correct himself where he went wrong, and he repented. That's his greatness. So he became very humble. So he asked her, I'm sorry, I was arrogant. Then she, of course, gave him food, and then he asked her, who is your teacher? So the lady answered, well, my teacher is staying a little away from here, and she gave detailed description of the route, and he followed that route and reached the place, and where he reached was a market. A butcher was sitting there distributing meat, and a long line of customers waiting. That was not the place he expected to reach. So it was a shock to him and a surprise. And he reached there, and as soon as he reached there, the butcher looked at him. Oh, you were sent by that lady? He must have walked several miles. This happened maybe 5,000 years back. So there was no modern communication. But this man suddenly realized this butcher is also not a professional butcher, just an ordinary butcher. So he waited. And after some time, he satisfied his customers. They went away. And then he started a series of instructions. Those instructions actually are technically more profound than even Bhagavad Gita. It's called Vyadha Gita. Now, Bhagavad Gita became so universal, so great, because Shankaracharya wrote a magnificent commentary on it. Before that, this Bhagavad Gita was not known even as a great spiritual classic. So it's called Vyadha Gita. Vyadha Gita is one of the most profound poems in the Mahabharata, which has got more than 100,000 verses. So, in that Vyadha Gita, in the instruction, during the instruction, the teacher, the butcher, told her how he was born in a family. Then as a young boy, he went to a forest, he meditated, but his father was a professional butcher. That was the job, only work he knew. So he continued his profession, but he continued doing that job with a different perspective. The difference in perspective is what distinguishes a spiritual person from another. So that's why, in this context, Satyakama was looking after 400 cows. He was not meditating. But he considered that work, the job of looking after the cows, as a great spiritual practice. So the mind with which he did that job was not the mind of an ordinary cowherd. It was that of a great spiritual seeker. So any work can be done with this attitude. So when we do our work with this attitude, what really happens is every work produces, samskaras. That is, whatever we do, it produces its tangible result. But that's only a fraction, an insignificant fraction of its result. It leaves something in our mind, a residual effect. It's called vritti. That's what happens, Even when you help a blind man to cross the street without anybody knowing about it, you feel in your mind, well, I have done something. That feeling. Now that is the result of this action. It's called apurva because it did not exist before that action. Adrishtam, because it is not visible. So that it's called vritti in the Yoga Sutra tradition, and it becomes a samskara. Actually, these samskaras determine how we think, speak, act, and interact with others. Samskaras constitute our real personality behind the physical personality. So, and the samskaras are also some other ingredient called vasana. How these samskaras manifest as interest or disinterest in certain activities. And so, there is a wheel we call karma, vritti, samskara, vasana, sankalpa, karma, vritti. Sankalpa means our decision to do certain things. Depending upon our samskaras, our tendencies, impressions accumulated in the mental system, we act and think and speak. And these activities also produce proportionate levels of samskaras. So that constitutes our real personality. So when the Satyakama did that job with a great sense of sanctity, he became a saint. You find in the story of Saint Joseph, it's called Giuseppe, he was born in Italy. He was born in a place called Cupertino, and he was a humble man. He had very little education. He was looking after the sheep, the cattle. So because he was so very simple-hearted person, but he was not an intellectual, and he became a saint, and he is the patron saint of the pilots, and the patron saints of those who prepare for examinations. In the reason because he was so dull, so accidentally happened to hear from a bishop a parable about the sheep, lost sheep. If you lose one sheep, you leave the 99 behind and go in search of the one. So that he learned. So that was the only thing he learned. Nothing will enter his head, though many people try to teach him. But he was such an exalted person internally. When he went for an examination to appear for training as a priest, this was the only question that they asked him. And that he answered magnificently, because every day he was repeating all the moment. So they were surprised. This man must have mastered the entire Bible. So he was admitted. So he is the patron saint of those who prepare for examinations. And he is supposed to had developed the ability to fly. So he is the patron saint of pilots. Anyway, so what I mean to say is another example. He looked after when he was looking after these sheep, one bishop who was visiting the place in a soliloquy muttered this parable. The parable, maybe Luke 15 or something like that. Saint Luke. And that brought about a complete change in his mind. So this Saint Luke parable he memorized. And they asked only that question. And he repeated word back. So what I mean to say, such examples you find in all traditions. Satyakama is a classic example from the Upanishad. But so, in the language of metaphor and parable, the story tells you a bull appeared and taught him, the fire taught him, the swan taught him, and a bird called Madgu taught him. That is only the language of the ancient scriptures.
Swami, you mentioned that wonderful book by Rudolf Otto on Shankara and Meister Eckhart.
Mysticism East
and West.
Yeah.
And then he also wrote another wonderful book called The Idea of the Holy. Yeah. And I was thinking of that in relation to those beautiful stories that young man had a sense of holiness there. And he was treating that very humble activity as a holy act somehow, and Rudolf Otto talks about this idea of the holy, and he says that the essence of it, I think he says, is that you have a sense of the otherness, what he calls the holy other, in nature, in the world, And it's that sense of something outside yourself that is significant and profound. And I was thinking in those stories that there is that sense of holiness, of the otherness, although the child wouldn't have said it in these fancy words, but he had it within. Yes?
You find such stories in the Jataka tales of Buddha, where he is supposed to have reincarnated 543 times in previous life cycles. When he was born, sometimes as a monkey, as an elephant, as an emperor, a king and servant. So many roles he played. But each of these roles, there was something that was inherent in him, that was, as you call, holy, which eventually terminated in his birth as Gautama Buddha. So, ascending order. So, you find the stories in many traditions. So, normally in our life, when we try to practice a higher ideal, we have to depend upon our natural inherent tendencies called samskaras. Many of them may not be very helpful. That's why people feel a bit of internal conflict and friction. When they meditate, sometimes you feel a strong prompting to go away and somewhere and read some newspaper. Because mind gets tired, fatigued. Because when mind goes through these conflicts, 10 different mutually conflicting tendencies, mind gets tired and fatigued. So people may not be able to practice for a long time. That's because negative samskaras are creating these hindrances, obstacles. So the only way out is to increase the percentage of positive samskaras, so that negative samskaras will be subordinate to them, or they may be neutralized. So these positive samskaras are generated by good actions, good thoughts, good words, good tendencies. So in the case of Satyakama, for such long time, it did nothing but this job of looking after cows, which by itself, there is nothing specially spiritual about it. But when he did that, if he had done carpentry, he would have done with the same sense of sanctity and sacredness. So the work we do is immaterial, but the mind with which we do, that's what really matters in the spiritual journey of the seeker. So that's what happens. New samskaras, fresh, healthy, spiritual samskaras were generated, and negative samskaras which may have inherited from previous life cycles were completely neutralized. They became weak. So these positive samskaras helped him to focus on this job with great sense of sanctity. So that's why a sense of sanctity transforms our most ordinary activities into something much more profound and spiritually much more productive. What happened here? That's what you find in the lives of great mystics of Europe, medieval times. You find many of them were busy doing ordinary work, building chapels, even running wine presses. Really, medieval European monasteries were well known for high quality wine. But they did it as a part of the monastic duties and responsibilities. So it was totally different.
Well, so Brother Lawrence was working in the kitchen and preparing the vegetables. But he felt that this was a sacrament. It was more sacred than these sacraments. I mean, it was as sacred.
St. Brother Lawrence is a grand example.
Because he was doing very humble work in the world's eyes, but it was very sublime for him.
Many sets.
Swami, do new samskaras, do they have a greater charge than old samskaras?
Yeah, they are interrelated, because old samskaras remain. Well, I have to give a detailed picture. Our samskaras are divided into 3 categories. One, those samskaras which have already started operating, they are responsible for our present life. our activities, our thoughts, it's called ideas, it's called prarabdha samskara. I mean prarabdha karma samskara. So, I mean which have already started working, unfolding. The other samskaras are called accumulated samskaras, which still remain in a dormant stage. So if in our life we can generate new, fresh, good samskaras, healthy samskaras through good actions, good deeds, good words, even an idea that flashes in our mind can produce samskaras. So they can neutralize the negative samskaras which are already there in the accumulated system.
How about the dormant ones?
Yeah, even dormant ones also will be weakened. Because when new samskaras are generated, they are added to the stock. So that's why
But new ones have more juice than old ones? Is that what you're saying?
new samskaras can be immediately felt, but the other samskaras are also operating. New samskaras can be felt immediately. That's why some people who do extremely good work, they will reap some good result in this life itself. So also the opposite also is true. So the intensity of samskaras, that is also an important factor. A very violent action with full awareness, with evil motive, with deep thinking, so that all these evil motives and ideas go very deep into a system, they will produce a huge quantity of negative samskaras. So also long practice of good actions, good words, good deeds, practice of unselfishness will produce a huge stock of intense samskaras. So intensity, the intensity with which we act, that also is a factor. The intensity, the application, the identification
So
with
not
which
just the newness, but the intensity of it.
and a person who has done a very good action, very good deed in this life, by the strength of that he can neutralize all the accumulated samskaras from previous life cycles also. Reincarnation and the samskaras, they are interrelated. Even the very dynamics of samskaras cannot be properly understood without taking into consideration the doctrine of reincarnation, Because how are people so different from each other? The same family you find, maybe 5, 6 members, 10 members, 5 children receiving the same education, growing up in the same family, 5 different attitudes and impressions. How do you explain this? Because they were 5 independent travelers coming from previous life cycles. Some of the external gross characteristic samskaras may be identical or similar, but at the deeper level you find diametrical differences. So,
You mentioned actions that what you achieve that doesn't give you a happiness is not success at all. You mentioned a statement.
Yeah, I was giving an example of how life is interpreted in terms of success in material life. So even
can
if
that be true? Sorry.
Yeah,
Can
continue.
that be true even in the spiritual realm? Can you unpack that? a
In
little?
spiritual life, an entirely set of new rules operate. I was giving an example of the inadequacy of the so-called material success, for which people struggle hard, thinking that's the end of everything, and did they find that, well, after having attained or obtained all these, they are not very happy. So if you don't have a happy mind after attaining what you call success, material success, then it's really not success. So success in the higher sense should produce a sense of contentment to be really called success. But frequently success, as we understand, doesn't produce contentment.
Why not?
That's because we do not take into consideration the limitation of success material success. Material success is not everlasting. It is only a temporary absence of failure. Really. Actually,
Oh, Swami, really?
yeah.
That's kind of looking at it negatively.
Yeah, but that's a fact. You see, no one
It's just
can.
like we're temporarily.
No one can have a continuous, unbroken flow of success
Yes,
and happiness.
Right.
Because
Why not?
because the richest man in the world or most successful man in the world is not always the happiest at the internal. Very often, you see, very often. Yeah, please.
I was going to say, the father of Standard Oil, who was an extremely rich man,
Who?
Rockefeller, John D.
Rockefeller. Yeah.
They said to him, "How much money do you want to have?" And his answer was, "$1 more than I have."
Yeah. That means he has to travel still long distance to realize and find out the inadequacy of what he now calls success. So, so very often, people who have succeeded like that, they also have imperfect minds and imperfect bodies. If they understand that mind and body as such can never be perfect, then they won't be troubled by the ill health of mind and body. Once we understand the limitation of the so-called success, then only we really understand success. So that's what happened. That's why it's just like one side of the coin. A coin cannot have just one side. There cannot be an unbroken flow of happiness. So that's why every kind of happiness at the material level is only a temporary absence of unhappiness. So real happiness comes when you stop seeking happiness all the time. Then there will be no time when you will be unhappy because you are not chasing happiness. Really. If we are always looking for happiness, we are doomed to be unhappy at some point of time. But if we take into consideration the possibility of unhappiness at some point, then we'll be able to look beyond happiness and unhappiness. And then unhappiness is no more unhappiness. It becomes part of the mind reaches a stage of equilibrium.
Could you say the opposite? Could you say that somebody who's always unhappy, they're just missing their happiness? I'm not quite sure how to say it.
There is nobody who's always unhappy. Just as there is nobody who's always happy. No.
Somebody chronically depressed.
Yeah. There is an interesting dialogue in the Mahabharata. I'm reminded of that. That's very psychologically very profound. So there is a dialogue between Maitreya and Sanat Kumar. I remember two sages. Who is your best friend? Very profound discussion. Who is your best friend? So one option is your best friend is one who helps you when you are in need of some help. When you are poor, he gives you money. When you don't have a job, he arranges a job for you. But the other sage says there is a better friend. The best friend is the one who is happy when you are happy. So the answer is, you may help a person may help you when you are in need of help, when you are unhappy. But when you are no more in need of his help, he may become unhappy. So he is a friend, but he is not the best. Because there are many people who want you to be always in need of some help from them. When they find that you are in need of some help from them, then it gives them great comfort. Oh, I am helping him. He is in a situation where he depends upon help from me. But the best man is who is happy when you are happy. It's more difficult to be happy when your friend is happy. Yeah. There's a very profound discussion. Anyway, so I think we have reached the time and we can have maybe tomorrow we'll continue the session. Okay, thank you.
That's fine. I
Thank
won't be here, so that's fine.
You won't be here. Then you can ask, of
No,
course.
she won't be here.
Then please ask. Please ask.
Oh, I don't know how relevant this is, but I was just thinking
Please.
of this. It's a poem by Emily Dickinson.
Yeah.
And she's talking about success, and the image, there's an image of a dying soldier. You know, this was sort of at the time of the Civil War. So she says, success is counted sweetest by those who ne'er succeed. To comprehend a nectar requires sorest need. Not one of all the purple host, that's the triumphant ones, who took the flag today, can tell the definition so clear of victory as he defeated, dying, on whose forbidden ear the distant strains of triumph burst agonized and clear.
Yeah.
Good.
It's a little different, but
Yeah, a poet can approach the subject from a
Yes.
different
Yeah.
angle. You find a poet. A poet can also have a glimpse of the
Yes.
transcendental truth. Frequently possible,
Yeah.
equally possible. Yeah. So poet, great writers, great mystics. Mystics different. They can retain that experience for a long time. Poets and thinkers and writers, creative writers. See, Dostoevsky's book is so grand and it's so much of transcendental spiritual ideas, but you won't call him a saint
no.
by any stretch of imagination. So, but then these great writers, creative writers, did a glimpse of it. To remain in that state, you have to practice yoga.
Yes.
Yeah, and doing these disciplines.
Yeah.
Swami, this is very quick, but I was just thinking about St. Paul and his early life. He persecuted Christians, tortured them.
Yeah.
Very bad samskaras there. And but then he had this transformation on the road to Damascus. He saw this divine light
Yeah.
that just enveloped him.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking that, his whole life, as we know, changed. And so, I think a story like that is so encouraging and comforting for all of us.
Yeah.
Because he had done terrible things.
Yeah.
And yet he was able to begin a whole new life.
True.
And, I'm sure that he had memories of those things. But this presence of the divine saw him through.
Yeah, as I mentioned, one intense and deep good action,
Yes, right.
when completely neutralize all the accumulated negative samskaras. So, jnanam sarva karmani bhasmasat kurude Arjuna. In the Gita, Lord Krishna says, it's called jnana, means the fire of spiritual realization.
Yes.
It burns away all the negative samskaras and karmas from the past.
Yes.
So this happens. In fact, the very fundamental doctrine behind confession, if you read Augustine's Confessions, a famous book, a person who really confesses, he starts a new life.
Right.
It's not a licensed renewal program every week.
Yeah.
Real confession is actually, it takes you straight to the Christian experience. If you take seriously the Augustine's Confessions and City of God. So that's what really happened to great men like St. Paul.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And the great comfort.
St. Francis of Assisi, he was a soldier.
Saint.
Saint.
Well, not
So once intense, actually Tulsidas was Indian poet, was an example of that. He was a totally worldly minded person. Then his wife scolded him, why don't you offer a little bit of this devotion you have for me to God? Then you become a saint. And he really became a saint. So that fire of repentance and which actually brings about a complete transformation, it burns away the whole accumulated stock of negative samskaras, what he calls sanjita samskaras, everything that Lord Krishna says.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.